So we talked about harvesting domesticated animals and the issues of grazing them, where the common goods action arenas attributes of the actors come in, and how they have been managed in Sweden and elsewhere in Himachal Pradesh and so on. Let's move to the next one. It's about commons represented in wild animals like fish and deer, as we mentioned before. And there's a good example of how communities' bottom-up efforts have managed it, and how that then required changes and multi-level governance structures to make sure that we didn't create tragedies of the commons. And it's not exactly triumph of the commons, but let's say at least it's maintaining a level playing field with resources not disappearing. Maine lobster fishery is a remarkable story of self-governance within the contemporary United States would be a dangerous statement. Within the contemporary United States, the lobster fishery of Maine is organized into territories along most of the coast. Day-to-day fishing regulations are organized by harbor gangs. That's not exactly a good word, but so it goes. These harbor gangs are informal groups that enforce local customs. In order to fish for lobster, you need to become a member of the harbor gang, which is the group of fishers who go lobstering from a single harbor. Members of this group can only set traps. Crabs and lobsters are caught by putting traps in the bottom of the ocean with some food in them, so they go in and they get trapped like a mouse trap. Members of this group can only set traps in the traditional territory of the harbor group. There are various fishing practices that each member is expected to obey, as we will see in a minute. These practices vary from harbor to harbor. To become a member of the harbor community, a formal position that gives you the right to lobster, requires participation by family members in that community for several generations. So this sets up some precedent in terms of how you can become part of the community. You have to be born there, right? People who are not born and raised in these harbor communities are considered outsiders and will have difficulty gaining the level of acceptance by the rest of the community that is required before the right to fish for lobster would be granted. In all harbor communities, a person who gains a reputation for damaging others' gear or for violating conservation laws will be severely sanctioned. For example, if a fisher goes out to collect his traps and discovers that somebody else has put traps in the same location, he may signal that this norm violation has been noticed by taking a lobster from the trap and leaving the trap open. So there are norms and punishments, rules that you have to follow, and there are enforcement by the community itself, and the rules are set by the informal gangs. Obviously, as the demand has grown and commercial values have grown, this is changing. And if you read about old stories, the prisoners up in the northeast used to be fed lobster every day, and they used to get bored of it, and now lobster is a exotic food which can cost you a lot of money. So here is a lobster fisher dropping his trap or pulling it up with a few lobsters in them, and some of the rules were simple, that you have to look at whether the lobster is too small, in which case you have to throw it back, or whether it has this V-notch in the tail so that you know that it's spawning, so it's laying eggs. So it's in the reproduction stage and you don't want to catch it, so you have to release it back. So these are voluntary efforts, but if you don't follow them, you are going to get hurt as well, since if you catch a lobster with a V-notch and you prevent its eggs from being spawned and growing into new lobster, the stock is going to go down for everybody, including you, right? This is how to manage common resources. So over time, you can see that the catch in pounds has gone up from 1880 to 2000. So you can see there have been ups and downs, and these are numbers in millions. So is that 10 million? So 10 million to 800. No, that is 80 million. Sorry, right? Yeah. So fairly significant numbers. There are known climatic connections where slow frequency changes in temperatures and other factors can cause natural variations in what is called recruitment. So the lobsters may be putting out a lot of eggs. Whether they survive and become juveniles and then adults depends on various things like availability of food and predator population, and so on and so forth. And of course, the idea with fisheries and in general exploiting wild resources is wild animals is that if you catch too many crabs at the wrong place in the low cycle, which may be natural, you may end up decimating the population. And this did happen for anchovies off of South America, and I think sardines off of Japan, and so on and so forth. So managing the ecosystem must keep these things in mind, but the gangs, informal gangs, may or may not have this sort of information, but they can build this in by just empirically noticing that the number is low this year at the beginning of the season. Then they can reduce the number of allowed catches for everybody. But also the number of the fishers themselves have gone up, so it's the total catch going up doesn't mean more lobsters, it just means more effort. So there is often a term called catch per unit effort for fisheries, which are used to see how the actual abundance is also changing. And that comes in here from top to bottom. Lobster catch in pounds since 1880. So that was what we looked at here. And here lobster catch per trap and per license based on the data from State of Maine historic data. So obviously per trap the numbers are not as high as the total we saw here. But you can see this tells you that even though total catch has gone up in pounds, catch per trap has either declined or remained steady, or maybe it's recovering a little, and so on. So what is natural variability in this? There is missing data. And what is forced human impact on lobster population, of course, has to be understood, and there are papers on this that you can go and read. So you can see there are missing data, and catch per license is lower than catch per trap, because if you issue too many licenses, then many may end up with no lobsters, even though average per trap is high. Some calculation is involved there you have to watch out for. Okay, so basically recently, in response to changes that were breaking down the informal harbor gang system, the state has formalized the system by dividing the state into zones with democratically elected councils. Each council has been given the authority over rules that have principally local impacts, so trap limits, days of lobstering, times fished, and so forth. Interestingly, the formalization of local zones was followed almost immediately by the creation of an informal council of councils to address problems at a greater than local scale, so multi-level governance. And the council worked at some councils worked at local one harbor with those lobster men, and then there were multiple councils, and they had to coordinate because, as we said before, the climate in general, climate impacts are on a larger scale, and lobsters don't move much, but the eggs may get transported and end up somewhere, or a disease may be coming down along the coast to affect your lobsters. So managing lobsters at each harbor is not going to be easy. You have to be aware of the context in terms of multiple sites of where lobstering is happening. In general, the next topic is on forests, so I won't go into these yet. But here, why did the idea of gangs managing it with informal gang system begin to fail? As I said before, lobsters have become a luxury item. People, especially far away from the coasts or places where lobsters are caught can pay a pretty penny for lobsters, and people also bring lobsters from Hawaii to the mainland and so on, because lobsters can be frozen and transported and they stay alive for a long time. They go into some state of existence where they are almost dead but not quite dead. So you want to eat a live lobster fresh, then you can do that by freezing them and so on and so forth. So with the increasing demand and prices going up, this becomes like a cash crop. Then obviously there are more problems with informal regulations and monitoring and obeying the laws, free riding, stealing, etc. So then you will need more formal structures. Does this continue to work as climate change impacts begin to, let's say, negatively impact the recruitment or the number of eggs becoming adults and so on, or the number of buyers going up, number of lobstermen going up and so on? That's not all clear yet. So this idea of managing the commons, sustaining the commons with norms, rules, punishments, ownerships and so on is a good idea. In the next chapter we will look at the core principles that can drive continued sustaining of the commons, which is what is the main goal of this book and this particular series of podcasts, that tragedies of the commons are not inevitable, that in fact they can be avoided with community participation and following of regulations and rules, which are, let's say, born locally, because every situation is local, and followed with certain provisions for punishing those who don't follow the rules and regulations. Okay, so let me stop this podcast here and we'll come back and look at how forests are exploited and what are the problems there. Forest story is a bit more complicated and we'll talk in the next podcast. Okay.